Thank you very much. I appreciate those that are with us today. It always feels better for me when I'm watching it live rather than watching a recording. And I know technically there should be no difference, but I always find I feel I'm more engaged if I am actually in the live version. So here we go. Thank you very much for joining us. I am Chief Executive of Genius Boards, and I find every day of my life being in the boardrooms of others absolutely fascinating, a constant journey of learning, and find it extremely interesting to see how people think, how they work, and how they don't realize what the outcomes might be of their collective board engagements. So we want to just pick on one very small topic that we're going to share, and that is the comparison of EQ versus IQ within the boardroom. So a very small topic within it, but we could probably talk for half a day and more. And our guest has actually written a book on it, just this one topic, his being half of the topic, the EQ element of it. My guest today is Paul Dubal. Paul Dubal is a thought leader in governance globally. He's based normally in Canada, but today he's on holiday at the moment, all packed ready for the next journey of his holiday. So, as we always do, we will be ending on time. Otherwise, he's going to have my guts for garters because he's going to miss the next step of his trip. He wrote the book EQ for the Governance Professional. I'll introduce Paul fully when we get a little bit further on. Our sequence for today, we're going to start with a poll very quickly. We're going to end with a poll as well. We're then going to have just a few slides to put us into the context of the issue we are talking about. Then Paul and I will have an in-conversation session. Please put questions into the Q&A, not into the chat. We may not see them there. I will look, but please don't. Please rather put them in the Q&A function. It's much easier for the panelists. And we will ask your questions in the latter part of the hour. And then we will close with the poll and closing comments from ourselves. Any questions we are not able to deal with, we will record and we will come back to you with answers if they have not been covered during the session. So thank you very much. Welcome. The poll, I'm going to just start that one off quickly. Just bear with me a moment. And this is purely just to understand your views on the issues of the IQ and EQ. And of course, now that I have started it, there it is. Got it. Okay, our first poll, here we go. Please answer as honestly and as quickly as you can. Let's see what your thoughts are. Got a few more to come in still. Thank you very much. We are seeing a balance of both as being our higher and equal views on IQ or EQ being the ratio that we need in the boardroom. Interesting. Reflect on this question at the end and see how you feel once we've talked this matter through, whether you still feel the same way on that particular poll. What I'd like to highlight today in the conversation we're going to have is a little bit of theory, why we find it all goes wrong once people are involved. What do we do to things? Why do we complicate them? The benefit of diversity within the boardroom environment, and then the criticalities of leadership. I think if we just put it into those four areas, this is what I want to talk about quickly before we get into the conversation, which is always the more interesting part of it. Looking at the definitions of EQ and IQ. IQ being cognitive intelligence, EQ being understanding, managing, influencing. It's the connectivity, the communication element. So our cognitive intelligence is that where we bring logical reasoning, we solve problems. People with a higher IQ tend to have a higher mathematical ability. Their verbal comprehension of either delivering or receiving is higher, and they tend to have very good memories. And the benefit of that is being able to analyze complex data. You can be in a room and you can see who's got the IQ. They look at something and they instantly see the pattern, they see the answer, they know how to navigate the minefield immediately. So these things of patterns are quite important, and we find that in machine learning and places like that, that's where you can teach a robot these kind of IQ things quite capably. Solving problems logically, solving them efficiently. And this can bring a lot of problems into a boardroom environment. The person with the high IQ sees the answer and can't work out why the rest of the room hasn't worked out the question yet. And so efficiently needs to be a balance where the entire group is collaboratively brought to the answer to give us the efficiency. Otherwise, we're going to find that a lot of the people actually don't know what's being discussed. So we also find those with high cognitive ability can adapt quickly, they can adapt to change, they can be agile, they are not destabilized by new information, new circumstances, new environments. They can absorb that kind of change more readily. They can understand the abstract. There's certain people, particularly a chairman I think of in question, who could not understand strategic thinking. This was just not on his radar, found it very, very abstract from the point of view, I'm a numbers person. If it's not on my spreadsheet, I don't understand it. And he would actually ban the directors in that boardroom for ever using the word strategy. Everything was about the budget, about the forecast, about the financial goals. And we'll look at a case study in a moment which shows where that goes wrong. And however, we talk about left and right brain, which we'll mention shortly, the person with a high IQ can think creatively because they can find solutions. So it's that element of creativity that is so critical. If we're looking at EQ, very different. People have a high self-awareness. They can regulate themselves effectively. They've got strong motivation for what they're doing, whether it's their values or their passion or their objectives, whatever they may be. But they have high empathy, ability to recognize and understand the perspective of others, but equally to have strong social skills, being able to interact with all other kinds of people in the equation. And why does that matter to us in a boardroom? Those with high EQ will allow for better leadership and better teamwork together. There's the corollary to that. I worked with an NHS trust at one point in time, and the top chair, CEO, chief nurse, and I think it was head of audit were all high on EQ. Not necessarily that focused on the razor edge part that IQ brings, that means we've got to get to a solution. So nothing happened very quickly in that environment. So again, we've got to be careful. Balance is important. I was just having a look now, the polls is not visible to us. I wonder if we'd had some more answers. It builds stronger relationships within the team, and we have greater resilience and stress management, which is obviously critical for our well-being and optimum contribution. It also provides the ability to communicate and to deal with conflict more effectively, and also to bring to the fore ethical judgment. So are we doing these things for the right reasons? And allows for us to engage with our stakeholders more effectively. So these are the things that is important between IQ and EQ. And this is the sort of stuff that we're going to cover for the rest of our session. So who should have high EQ in our boardroom team? Clearly, the chairman will need it. The chairman is like the conductor of an orchestra. They need to set the tone. They need to set the culture. They need to set the boardroom dynamic that is present. And they need to pull in, hear the sounds from the different players. And if you're thinking of an orchestra, if the wind is not loud enough or the drum is too heavy, being able to tone things up and down consistently through a session that they're playing. This is what the chairman should be doing throughout a meeting. They should be able to create a safe place in which everybody can do their bit constructively and to deliver equally, speak up and be contributing party. And in this process, we need a chair that is able to manage diversity. I talk about the diversity of a kennel of dogs versus a zoo of all animals. I would not want to be chairing a zoo. I would happily chair a kennel. The kennels are all dogs. They have some commonality. You have some kind of knowledge as to how they're going to behave. In a zoo, a snake and a lion are going to do things differently. And you need to be able to, it's almost impossible to manage that for an effective outcome. The problem we have is many chairmen don't actually have a high degree of EQ. It doesn't make a lot of sense why, but if we have a look at the chairman of today and particularly of yesteryear, the EQ is not their highest trait. IQ potentially, because invariably you've got a industry specialist, so the IQ can be high. We do need EQ present in our CEO, our whole executive team, and all our directors, particularly our SID. Definitely need that there, depending on what country you're in, the senior independent director or similar named individual. The other one I want to spend a bit of time on quickly is the company secretary. They are the bridge between the board and the company, making sure that what the board sets as its objectives, its culture, its tone, its deliverables are brought into the organization, complementing what is being done by the CEO, CFO, also in the meeting, and the rest of that team. So it's holding to account the entire organization. They use discretion, they have empathy, they engage all the peers as they need to, but they engage on a one-to-one basis, which is also critically important. They're the one who's there all the time. The board is not. They are often very good facilitators as well. And if I had to be a betting person and I look to the future, I do believe a lot more company secretaries are going to become chairman of boards. This is a very natural skill for the company secretary. Most people think I've gone to planet somewhere else and think I'm completely mad. But I did notice Paul nodding sagely there. So I do have a colleague who agrees with me on that one. So the role of the EQ in the modern agenda. We have all these complex, sensitive issues. We have things like cyber. We have things like well-being and everything in between. The whole ESG agenda. And there are a lot of these topics which have a huge amount of emotion built around them rather than facts. Some people haven't got the facts, so therefore are on the back foot on some of these topics, and therefore often not handled well in boardroom environments. We are improving, thank goodness. But the importance is to navigate in this environment. There are very vastly different deltas on people's opinion, the references and experience they come from, and the passion and interest they might have in different elements of these topics. So it's important that we, as a chair, understand the values, opinions, biases, and misconceptions that exist within our boardroom environment and work to either educate, to listen, to get the divergent opinions, and for the board to actually make better decisions as a result of having further information than they would otherwise have, which also allows us then to communicate more effectively with our myriad of stakeholders that fit into our modern agenda. So what we're expecting of the board, chair, company secretary, and everyone else is to listen, to diffuse some of the emotion that might be pent up in some people's opinions, be inclusive of everybody and give everyone fair, safe airtime to say their bit. You might not agree with everything, but if we listen to everyone, we're in a stronger position. It's not the loudest, it's everybody. So we need to give everyone a fair share. And the chair needs to bring down the louder voice and bring up the quieter voice, as an orchestra conductor would do. So that collaboration is recognizing the value of the human brain being brought to the conversation so that we can, and I'm not going to try and go through the genius decision-making model, but this is the kind of process that one needs to go through. This is a lesson in itself. The importance we have here is that EQ humanizes governance. It gives it a body, a soul, a character. It's not a policy document that is laid out on a piece of paper that says send you to sleep the minute you try and read it. It is also about ethical leadership within our organizations and making sure that our board, heads of department, committee chairs, whoever they may be, are resilient, that they can adapt, and they can trust. And the importance is to be able to trust everybody in your team, because then we will be effective in getting to the right decisions in all elements of what we're doing in the organization. So if we've got all this good stuff, what happens if we don't have enough EQ? Now, not everyone's going to have equal IQ and EQ. Some are going to be much stronger on the one, some are going to be much stronger on the other. Again, adding this diversity that the chair has to manage to ensure that both get equal voice and equal airtime. Having a bully in the boardroom is definitely not very productive. It causes people to just stop thinking, stop making the effort, just let things happen, roll over, and so things just go on in the line of the objective of the leader in question. So we see quite a lot of stakeholder failures. We see staff morale failing. And we're going to look at a case study in a moment. All the wrong decisions are happening. Change management is not handled. And invariably, things like a crisis are not going to be handled well in that kind of aspect. And the big problem we have is we're going to start not getting the employees and stakeholders into our business that we want, whether they are investors or people. So we can build our EQ. It's not so much like IQ, you're a bit limited in building that. You can get pattern recognition, you can get efficiencies, but actual IQ is difficult to change. But your EQ, you are fully responsible for your own EQ. And I would start with the first three is self-awareness. Watch yourself, listen to yourself, be aware of what you look like, what your body language is, how you are interacting with other people. Be mindful for the person sitting next to you so that when you are fidgeting or turning your back or not concentrating, the impact that is having on the person next to you, for example. Difficult one, ask for feedback. If you're going to ask for feedback, be prepared to receive it. So asking for it is all very brave. Receiving it, we suddenly get thin-skinned and we get upset and we get sensitive and we hold it against the person who we asked it of. Not fair. We all know that we have certain triggers that set us off. Be aware of those. And making sure that we are inclusive in every way that we operate. We need to earn trust. So if we are going to earn trust, we need to show respect to others as well. We need to be consistent in character, not one day Jekyll, one day Hyde. That's not how you're going to build trust with your colleagues. And have the right motivation for everything that you are doing. Very, very important. And I encourage all directors to build strong relationships with the chairman, but equally with the company secretary. Everybody else is included. But those two are important because they're going to bring different focus areas for you as a director to be the best director you can. I mentioned I was going to do a case study. I'm not going to go through all of this in detail. We don't have the time available. But the Qantas case study, which sort of their governance failure erupted post-COVID. A very strong command and control environment, long tenure CEO who had got very into the detail of the organization during the period of COVID and hadn't had any transition to allowing the team to be able to fly. One of the things I pick up in board evaluations quite regularly is saying to the board, get off the shoulders of the CEO. Allow the CEO to have wings. Give them the ability to do the job. Because if you don't, they will leave. It's simple as that, because they got to being CEO because they want to be the master of their destiny. They want to lead the organization. Sitting on their heads is not going to do that. So it's very important for the board to realize where that governance line is, to stay on the correct side of it. So the result here is you got a board that was completely deferential. They came to the meeting. It was a sort of pitch up, show your face, groupthink. Let's just agree to everything the CEO wants. And any dissent was silenced, and their oversight competencies were extremely low. That resulted in lots of ineffective boardroom dynamics coming from the top. They had a very combative social media, public media face, which impacted them reputationally hugely. They didn't focus on the company, on the customer. Their focus was purely on the numbers and the operational element of the business, to the complete exclusion of the customer. There was legal and ethical breaches. They weren't focused on the ESG agenda, which for an airline is surprising. The board composition needed some review and refresh, and the failure to transition leadership style post the COVID era. So there were a number of improvement themes that were stated here, and I've sort of translated those into some English, but important things like succession planning, actually looking to change the leadership of the organization, getting into decision-making transparency, and creating an environment of a safe place for the directors to be diverse, but to have an opinion and to be able to speak up and be listened to. So getting that balance was all important, and to effectively set metrics to monitor over the years that followed how they improved their governance. Just a couple of quick images. We run a series of training courses ranging from half an hour to 4 days, but for most of our course, and we also have the online versions, and we have the post-boardroom versions, where we can look at different elements of topics for director engagement and improvement in their knowledge. I know many regulated areas do need to have consistent training. So we offer training at various different levels. But one of the things we've brought together, and I'll show you a slide next, of all the different thinking styles that well, here we've only picked 4 of them, of the different things that are influencing and creating us to be different directors, one from another. So you've got the Belbin roles, you've got the different thinking styles, you've got the Myers-Briggs, and Genius has created the 11 quotients, which allow you to look at the different ways of how you engage. What do you bring to the fore? Do you have a low risk appetite? Are you neurodiverse in your thinking? How resilient are you? Can you be strategic? These are the kind of things that we look at. So coming to a close, the personality lenses, we're looking at the quotients we've got. Your system 1, system 2 thinking. You know how often you'll talk to somebody, they say, I need to reflect, I need to think, give me a moment. And the others say, brilliant idea. These are the two system 1, system 2 thinkings. System 2 being the ones who need to think about it, reflect it, absorb it. That can take a minute, it can take weeks, whereas your system 1 will come to an answer, but can easily, quickly correct their view. You've got your left brain, right brain, the more numbers orientated, the more pictures orientated, creative orientated sides of our brain. We have 2 sides to every brain, and we use them in different ratios. If we look at the different characteristics, showing there we have the different character types. This is the moral DNA, obedience, care, and reason, and how that impacts the way we operate. And then De Bono, for example, has the thinking hats, to which Genius has added the 7th, which is the one that goes around the facilitation role and making sure that we are leading structured discussions and bringing everyone to the party. So it's the bringing together of all the abilities of the six thinking hats. How do we chair that and produce the seventh hat that we are looking to? So our last slide, ethical decision making. This is moral DNA. This is another model that is of value to look at. I'm not going to try and go through it now. It's quite complex, but here it's bringing your cognitive processing with your strategic problem solving, and how do we do the different types of decisions based on the matrix of the three circles that exist there between your cognitive, strategic, left brain, right brain, system one, system two thinking. So it gives you a feeling and a concept of how we work differently to the person sitting next to us. And I think the critical thing we learn in governance is making sure that we recognize others are different, and therefore we do need to, at all times, listen to what is important that other people are thinking, because we have not got the only answer in our brains. Other people have got different perspectives, which we have to take into cognizance within a boardroom environment. So I encourage you for a moment just to think about the nuggets that we've just talked about now. What are the things that are important that you've just had an opportunity to look at? I'm going to, just while you're doing that, I'm going to launch a second poll. Have a look at that. Let's see what your views are on this one. It would help if you launched it. Doesn't wish to launch for some specific reason. I'll have a look at that in a moment. Please take just a moment to think, what is the thing you're going to do differently with the knowledge you have gained in the last 20 minutes or so? While you're doing that, I'm going to introduce Paul. Paul, you've waited a long while. Thank you very much. Paul and I have known each other for many, many years, both being in the governance profession. He's an author and a speaker with at least 2 decades experience in this place, in this environment. And as I mentioned earlier, is the author of EQ for the governance professional. So looking at it specifically with the company secretary governance professional lens, and we're talking about it quite generally as well as in this context. So Paul's work centers on the belief that effective governance is not just about rules and oversight, it's about relationships, empathy, and ethical leadership. I think we're talking the same stuff, Paul. Here we go.
Absolutely.
It champions the integration of EQ into board culture. So it really is important. And Paul's insights through the book he's doing, and also he does training for ISO 37000 on to that governance metric, which is in its context, any governance feels very dry, but brings the fact that you need a human-centered lens at all times. And actually, we've got to work smarter rather than, but we need to work smarter, but equally, we need to be wiser in what we're doing together. It's not just simply one solution fits every board environment. It doesn't. So I would like you to all welcome Paul, who is on holiday. Lucky man, he's in a very hot place. You can see him. He looks warm, much warmer environment than any of
Very
us
warm.
in the Northern Hemisphere at the moment. So welcome, Paul. I don't know if you'd like to just comment quickly as an opening statement before we go into conversation. Entirely up to you.
Sure, yeah. Well, first of all, Sharon, just wanted to say thank you very much for inviting me, and always a pleasure to work with you. Holiday or working, it's all the same for me. But I think some of the points that you raise there really do resonate with my own thinking around this. And I always consider governance an activity. And that means that it is a combination of the systems, but equally, it's about behaviors and attitudes and mindsets. And I think that's a very much a key theme of what we're talking about today.
Mhm. Thank you very much, Paul. Your book is extremely interesting in all the points that it brings out. And you talk about it being EQ is essential for modern governance. So just picking up on the modern governance, how has
Mm,
governance changed? That we talk about modern governance,
mm.
has the whole
Mm.
world of the COSEC or of chairs or of boards, what's changed?
Well, I think that when I first qualified as a corporate secretary in 92, at the end of it was sort of that period where um, we had Cadbury come out in the wake of the Maxwell scandal, and so there was the first real look at the lens of a board and how they actually operate. Prior to that, as you'd mentioned before, Sharon, a little bit like the Qantas sort of culture of the board being very deferential, and they had this element of groupthink, rubber stamping, very much the CEOs or management's proposals. And that was very much the case with Maxwell, that were very dominant. You mentioned the bully as well, and Robert Maxwell, certainly a bully, that the directors were beholden to him. They followed everything that he said. There was no challenge, any pushback, or any thinking around the morality of some of those decisions. And so what we've seen over these last 30 plus years, Sharon, is an evolution that by various governance codes around the world, which highlight the need for governance to, and specifically the board as well, to really step up and to provide oversight and to ensure that they are pushing back, they're challenging management, that they're not just rubber stamping, that they use diversity, cognitive diversity, to make better decisions, and decisions that are not just necessarily about the company's bottom line financially. It's also about the considering the needs of the stakeholders. And that's very much a theme in the ISO 37000 that you mentioned, Sharon, because we have to, for an organization to be long-term sustainable, we need to look at the bigger picture beyond just shareholders and consider the value that we can give to a wider group of stakeholders, because they essentially provide the resources for the organization and they provide our social license. And so that's where I think boards have needed to evolve, and individual members of the board, they've needed to evolve their thinking to encompass a sort of wider duty, if you like, to those stakeholders.
Thank you, Paul. Very nicely. They talk, what's it? Cognitive diversity has the ability to express yourself and to listen. You have both. And yet you're spending
Thank
all
you.
your time here talking about EQ, which is really interesting. I covered in what we were talking about the criticality of the chair's leadership of a
Yeah.
board. And you've obviously done research. I've been in many boardrooms, as have you. And we know that we are calling as a governance message to boards is to bring diversity into their boardrooms.
Yeah.
And one of them, for example, is neurodiversity, which be careful which one's
Mm,
got the neurodiversity, because you could end up with things getting a little challenged. Maybe you've got some examples there. I plenty have. Um,
mm,
but also the ethical clarity and the emotional balance that we need to
mm,
get from a chair. And I think we spoke a little bit a few moments ago when I talked about being consistent. How
mm,
critical is it for the chair and the COSEC to be consistent? And maybe you have some examples of what might
mm.
happen if they're not.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, I think one of the things that I have seen with the role of the company secretary, governance professional, however we like to call it, various titles now, chief governance officer, um, is to work closely with the board chair to, first of all, create the agenda and to discuss, aspects such as the culture of the board, the dynamics, specific challenges. So you go beyond, as a company secretary, you go beyond just the facilitation role, and you're actually working in a leadership role in tandem with the chair and being that sort of support for the chair. And so, as you mentioned, Sharon, they are similar sets of skills in that regard, that how we run the meeting effectively. Now, you mentioned about the chair being a conductor. I really love that analogy, because I think that that is something that we have to bring all of these different parts of the equation together, the different instruments, to ensure that what we produce is something that is we can hear and not think, no, that's completely wrong. And so I see the chair as having that sort of setting that moral compass. They need to be ethical. They need to have sound judgment and be able to listen with empathy and to bring those disparate parts of the equation together, so that there is that element of diversity, the cognitive diversity we talked about, where they bring together all of these different opinions and viewpoints and be able to build consensus, to be able to collate them all together and bring them into a sort of summary, if you like, that builds consensus. So I see relationship building as well as very, very much a key part of that, because as a chair, I think you need to have an element of gravitas, an element of respect, and that is earned. It's not just given by your title. You need to earn that trust. And I do think also that a good chair will be somebody who's a coach and a mentor, not just to the board collectively, but also to individuals. And I really see the company secretary sort of working to support the chair in the same way that they themselves have to make sure they can read the room, they understand where perhaps issues are occurring. And I've always in board meetings sat right next to the chair, sat next to them, passing notes perhaps, and just being that sort of support behind the chair, because to me that's the leadership role of a governance professional, company secretary. That's a key part of it, really. It's just making sure the board runs smoothly, but overall the board is functioning effectively.
I think that role of the company secretary being the ears and eyes of the unspoken word in the room, because invariably we still have probably higher EQ typically in the COSEC than we have in the chair. And the chair is invariably not seeing the unspoken word, is missing the person who's just keeping quiet, is allowing inappropriate airtime to the noisiest, to the bully, to the CEO, for example. How often I have seen the CEO and the chair where the CEO almost owns the chair. And I've seen some
Yeah.
disastrous outcomes as a result of that relationship not being independent, not being challenging, not in the boardroom, outside the boardroom, where the chair can be a coach and a mentor. And it's difficult. In one organization I was working with, the chair was an industry specialist, had been there longer than the CEO, had heaps of experience. I've seen it in two different industries now, as I think about it, and literally told the CEO what to do in the boardroom environment. So the complexity that you have there is the distortion of the roles starts to break down. You don't have that independence, which is a nightmare. We've got a whole chapter in our training on groupthink. In your book, what research have you covered around the topics of groupthink? How do they manifest? Why? How to break it? How do we undo it?
Yeah. Well, the whole concept, Sharon, and you mentioned some of the issues when you're not working consistently, the company secretary and the chair, and I think those issues can break down. And I've actually seen the opposite as well, where the CEO is so powerful and so pushing forward as well that often the board is just almost subservient to the CEO, and I work as also one of the things I do is an EQ practitioner. So I do EQ assessments, and I remember actually working with one board that I did individual EQ assessments for them, and they had this almost this what's the expression, like imposter syndrome. That was it, you know, and that they felt that the board was so the CEO was so knowledgeable that they were just there to essentially support the CEO, and that meant just exactly groupthink to rubber stamping. And then we talked about how, you know, their role and how it needed to be more expansive. And I think that sometimes it's the attitude that one comes onto a board that can determine whether there is groupthink arising or not. Now, when we think about groupthink, it really, you know, its origins date back to the US military, actually, the whole concept of, you know, that you had very similar people in the room, and that there was a very much within the military, there was a command and control structure, and so there was a chain of command that said you really didn't question your superior, and you didn't challenge. And of course, what happened was that there was various you know, disasters, if you like, or near disasters. The Cuban Missile Crisis was one of those. I mean, that's sort of before our time, but you know, it sort of really went from there. You know, that was in the early 60s, and they learned from that whole concept of saying, well, look, we need to have people that can challenge our mode of thinking, because if we've got similar people with similar attitudes, similar backgrounds, then of course they're going to have similar conclusions. But that means that we fail, therefore, to look at the bigger picture, and we have blind spots. And there's history is littered, corporate history is littered with organizations that have had massive blind spots. I mean, Kodak, Netflix, not Netflix, Blockbuster, failing to buy Netflix when they could have done, you know, at the start of the century. And, you know, this is what groupthink causes. It causes decisions to be very linear, one-dimensional, not looking at the bigger picture, and there hasn't therefore been that depth of discussion that we need in order to have a fully rounded decision where there's been rigor in the process of arriving at that decision. And that's where I think groupthink can be hugely damaging for any board in any industry if you just defer to the chair or to the CEO. Yeah, you're not therefore performing what you should be doing as a board member, which is an oversight role and challenging management. If you fail to do that, then you're a wasted board seat. Really are.
Agreed.
I'm being blunt there.
If you look at the recommendations that came out of the Qantas case study, is more rigor in the debate, more challenge of the executive, more of all the things we know about, stepping up. Great, lovely words in recommendations. How do you do that when you have either a CEO or a chair that is an absolute bully with their knowledge, with their objectives, with where they're taking the business, their focus, their culture that they're creating? What is the spanner? What is the change? How do we get things to be different because they're wrong at the moment?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sharon. I'm actually coaching an individual that is in that dilemma at the present time, and she's extraordinarily high in EQ, and she sees what's happening on the board. It's essentially almost a male-dominated board. She's two of 11 two ladies, 9 male directors. And she's facing, I think, that whole issue around how to bring in that more sort of diverse thinking. How do you do it? It takes a lot of courage, first of all, to stick your head above the parapet
and get it shot off immediately.
Exactly, that's right. You're going to get hit. But you know, this is the role of a modern director. You need to have the courage. You need to have, and when we think about the vast range of EQ, it's not just about, you know, people said to me, oh, EQ, that's about being a nice person, isn't it? No, it's nothing to do with that. It's a whole array of skills. And you talked about some of those, Sharon, in your slides. There's a whole vast array of skills that make up that emotionally intelligent director. And those are the courage to be able to speak up, and a learning mindset as well, being curious, being prepared to ask difficult questions, challenging questions that take the board forward in their thinking. So there is an art to asking the right questions as well. And if you're thoroughly prepared, and if you have a degree of one of Daniel Goleman's attributes is about self-confidence as well, when you feel secure in your position. And if you feel secure, you can be prepared to ask the question, and strong enough and resilient enough to maybe take some of the heat that you might face. So I'm telling my coachee that be patient, that change takes a long time, because when you have a board culture that's fairly ingrained, it only really changes when people leave and new people come in with different attitudes and different mindsets and different views. So I do think also one of the most important things that the organization, its nominating committee, can have is recruiting the right people on the board, recruiting for fit, and recruiting for in a way that is in compliance, if you like, with the organization's strategy and direction. And that means having people that can create the right culture, the culture that you want, where right through the organization, governance is integrated fully, so that you have people that are committed, loyal, engaged, know their role in the organization. And when you get that type of culture, that means people don't leave, and you build strength from within. Because you've got a committed, productive, and creative and innovative culture as well. And that's the sort of people that we want to have on our boards, because as you mentioned, Sharon, the board sets a tone at the top. And the ISO 37000, so much about the messaging is that good governance should be integrated right throughout the organization. The leadership flows from the top, and there should be that consistency of decision making right through the organization.
Thank you, Paul. Very insightful. I had witnessed an example where a director did not agree with a proposal, let's call it an investment proposal, from the CEO, and voted against it. It passed. And as we know, as the director, one goes with the majority decision and you support it. You are the best risk analysis thereafter, because you'll be looking for what you want to prove that you were right in the first place. That's the human element. But that individual is excellent opportunity for the chair to use as a sounding board going forward. This conversation between the director and the chair continued offline. And the chair in the next meeting turned to the person and said, I understand you're not comfortable with the decision that's been made. And the chair, in a very ineffective way, tried to bring it back to the vote again. But it had been decided. Well, CEO went ballistic. It's some stuff I've never seen before in my life. It was quite dramatic in the boardroom. And in the end, the chair let that director hang out to dry, because immediately switched and went with the CEO again, bullied back into submission. So however much the chair knew morally this wasn't good, could not have the spine, and no other director had the spine to rethink this conversation again. So sometimes it can be very unpleasant for a director to stand by their views, but then that's what you're taking on with the job. Another element that is, there was a point I was trying to make. Yes, I was talking about what instrument do we use to create change? One of the things you mentioned is a change in the personnel. Either the chair or the CEO to start with creates immediate change. A number of directors will create immediate change. But how do you do that? Yes, it might be a review of your nominations committee's effectiveness and up that and improve that. Or one of the things we do see often is the board evaluation. That
Yes.
can be a spanner where a third party is coming in saying you're not effective, rather than the chair or the CEO against all this resistance trying to create change from inside. So there are a couple of tools that people can turn to. Before I ask Paul the next question, we have got some questions that are coming up. Can we have some more in the Q&A? If anybody would like to add a question, I'd be very grateful. So we can not only look at our perspective, but what is your perspective? Do you have something in your boardroom environment you would like to ask? How would one solve it, for example? We say that people with IQ have agility.
Mm,
People with EQ equally have agility. How do those things differ? If the director that's high on IQ being agile, and a director that's
mm,
high on EQ being agile, because generally, it's a huge generalization, humans don't like change.
mm.
So, how do we manage that as an individual or as a leader of a board?
So managing change, I think, is something which is a critical skill for both a chair and also facilitating that change as a company secretary supporting the chair. And as a director, you need to have the mindset of, Bob Garrett talks about a learning board. And how important it is to go on to a board with a sort of humble mindset to say, I'm prepared to learn and understand, and I'm not the finished article. I don't know everything. I'm there to learn. So the first of all, I think you need to be very open-minded, very curious, and willing to listen to different perspectives and to respect those, even where they differ from your own. Like the case you mentioned, Sharon, that could have just been a case of, okay, your dissension is noted, we understand it, thank you, we're moving on, and that would have been quite acceptable. As a director, you have to understand that people will have different views to your own, and that's okay. So if you have that mindset, you can embrace change so much easier in that sense. You're not afraid of change. You understand that the board and the organization is evolving and that you need to evolve similarly with it. And so if you have that mindset, you're not rigid in your thinking, that I think is the EQ side, because when you develop that change management thinking, you embrace change, um, uh, you ask questions, of course, and you test processes, but you do so with an open mind. And I think that's slightly different from the IQ agility, where you can quickly make calculations or you can quickly draw conclusions
Mhm.
in the moment. This is a longer term approach to how the board actually evolves and changes over time, and you being able to facilitate that and to coach and support others that maybe are a little bit more resistant as well,
Mhm.
so that you help them along on that journey and recognize that, when let's say you have a 3-year board tenure to begin with, things are going to change. We look at the world today, it changes rapidly. Things are going to change from day one to end of year 3. And so you have to be prepared to adapt. You've got to approach it with that mindset.
Mhm. I think that openness to alternative opinions is important. I worked with a bunch of PhD helium breathing individuals, and I did an EQ test with them because exactly the sort of thing you're doing. And I couldn't work out why I could not reach these guys. They
Mm,
were on another planet, I was on another planet. So we all did the EQ test, and they say that the top leaders in the world are in the sort of top 25% quartile of EQ capability.
mm.
This entire group was 16. Not one of them even made 25%. They were all deep in the bottom quartile.
And
And you
very
look
similar group, I guess, as well. That
very,
group thinker.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
however much they didn't know each other, they operated in slightly different industries, they had different boards that they were on, but they had a
Mm,
commonality of being IQ huge. They all had their PhDs in something highly scientific or clever. Very, talk languages none of us even begin to understand. And the biggest thing we taught them then, once we understood what was their challenge, was how to have a conversation. They
mm,
didn't know. They only knew how to tell people they were right.
mm.
And these are the facts. And ears shut. So the biggest thing we achieved in this 2-day training was listen. Others might
Listening.
have an opinion. So a way when you are, for example, what we achieved in this is when you're in an environment and somebody is saying something you vehemently disagree with, red mist comes out immediately.
Mm,
Or somebody says something that you find uncomfortable, red mist.
mm,
So the lesson there as a director, when you get stuck in that space, ask
mm,
a question. Just ask a simple why.
mm.
Let them bury themselves if that's actually the right thing to happen. But turn on your ears and you might actually learn something. But your red
Yeah.
mist will dissipate and then you can continue a conversation. So when
Couldn't
you do
agree more. Yeah.
boardroom dynamics, you end up with all sorts of interesting things you need to cover.
Well,
The
just a very brief
Yes,
comment on that,
yes.
I just wanted to very quickly talk about listening and how that's allied to empathy. And empathy is one of the most critical leadership skills that you can have, because when you have empathy, it's a huge conflict resolution tool as well. And one of the courses I run is on board conflict management, and there's a concept around empathy and how that can be one of the most important skills that a board member can possess, because it opens up all of those range, that cognitive diversity, that open-mindedness, curiosity, listening, and resolving conflict as well. When, because you're seeing the other person's, or you're looking to understand the other person's perspective. So
Mm,
really, really important. One of the key skills, if you teach yourself, work on your EQ, is empathy.
fantastic. That always sounded like your closing comment. So just as the final words, because I know you have got transport with you, picking or sorting you out in the next moments. What would you like to share as there's one thing the attendees today learn? What is that one thing?
Yeah, thank you. And absolutely, empathy is very, very important. I think that I want to really highlight something you mentioned earlier, Sharon, that EQ is a skill that can be learned.
Mm,
This is something that, like a new language or learning a new instrument, you have to practice it on a regular basis in order to build those muscle memory, if you like, around EQ. Now, the great thing about being a board member, or indeed working in the corporate environment generally, is that life gives us every opportunity, many, many times a day, to practice those EQ skills. So what I would certainly recommend is that if you're listening today and you think, I could do better with that, then really work on that, practice it, read around it, read Daniel Goleman's book.
yes.
If you're a corporate secretary, a bit of a plug, I know, Sharon, but maybe pick up my book, and because
Yes.
I highlighted it from the perspective of a corporate secretary and how EQ can really help in that role, because it is a culmination, I suppose, of 30 years of my experience seeing where boards have sometimes got it wrong. And so, and what we can do as a company secretary to really support them in that journey. So really just, I think, educate yourself and continue to learn and grow and have all of those things that we've talked about. Be open-minded and be curious to learn. I think that's the key message for me.
And one last added one to that, empower yourself to be the chief of staff to the chairman. And if you can
Yes,
do
yes.
that, everything that the company secretary needs to achieve can be done. But you need to self-empower, earn the power, and be trusted to deliver effectively on the governance that you need to do and on the EQ.
You become a
I'm,
leader then as well, a
yes,
servant leader, but a leader. Yes.
very much a leader. Company secretary is one of the it's the power behind the throne.
Mm.
And there's many sayings that go around that. So, Paul, thank you so much. As always, you and I could chat our heads off forever.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
lots to cover.
Similar context, similar passions, and to the future of company secretaries, corporate secretaries, governance professionals, empower yourself to be the strength of the board. Thank you very much, Paul. Enjoy the rest of your
Thank you.
holiday.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time. Thanks. Bye.